Hey everyone, it's been a while since I made one of these tier list videos. I am such a big fan of the Final Fantasy series. You guys know that from all of the videos I've released on this channel. I've released about like 4 Final Fantasy videos, and one of them was going over my huge Final Fantasy collection, which I've added a lot to. Maybe I'll make another video on that. Today, we're actually just going to be talking about my personal favorite Final Fantasies. I thought it was a good time to make this because, you know, Final Fantasy 16 was released and it just released some new DLC, and I think because of that, I had enough time to digest it. I couldn't quite give an opinion on the game and present that opinion to you guys. I thought it would be very important for me to go over the main series, at least not the side games, but the main series, and kind of just go over what I've played, which is most of these games. There is a section on this that says haven't played, but we'll get into that. But most of these games I have played, and I thought it was very important for me to go over my opinion throughout the series, so you know what kind of Final Fantasy fan I am. The beautiful thing about being a fan of this franchise is that nobody's list is exactly the same, and I think that's very exciting. Even, you know, my least favorite Final Fantasy is someone's favorite Final Fantasy, I'm sure. For today's video, we're going to be going over my thoughts on the Final Fantasy series. So, you know, let's not waste any more of your time and let's go ahead and get started. So first off, we have to talk about the original, which is Final Fantasy 1. And when I think about this game, I really just kind of think about its legacy on the NES system, right? So the Nintendo Entertainment System had some RPGs, but there were very few influential ones. I think the very first one I would say was really influential is probably Dragon Quest, and then Final Fantasy was just right behind it. And because of that, I think sometimes Final Fantasy 1 can get a bad rap because, you know, it's not going to be nearly as good as every single game that comes after it, maybe with a couple exceptions. But for me personally, I still view Final Fantasy 1 as a B-tier game. And the reason why I personally think it's a B-tier game is because if you compare it for its time, it's actually one of the best games of the NES era, even despite its flaws. And the version I'm thinking about when I play Final Fantasy 1 going forward is going to be that Pixel Remaster, which I feel does a great job making Final Fantasy 1 very accessible to an audience. I recommend playing Final Fantasy 1 maybe after you play a few of the other titles that I'm going to mention on this list. Anything in the B tier really qualifies for that. So it's going to be one of those, like, if you played something else in the series, go to the B tier to explore some other interesting concepts and games. But 1 is something that I would recommend someone, if they played another Final Fantasy before and they want to see where it all started. I think 1 is actually a genuinely good experience to go through. Now, this is going to be interesting because Final Fantasy 2 is something that, you know, it's a game that a lot of people hate. There was a retrospective that changed, maybe not like my opinion on Final Fantasy 2, but the way I viewed Final Fantasy 2. However, for me, Final Fantasy 2 is still a D tier game. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everything in this game is bad. I do love the music, and I do love the kind of new approach the story was trying to take. They were trying to be like a little bit darker, a little bit more serious. However, for me, one of the most important aspects of a video game is being able to play it, and I just cannot play through this game. I think the leveling system is really dumb. I don't like it. It's a common complaint you hear from a lot of people in the community, but I really don't like the leveling system in this, and I've tried it multiple times. Even the Pixel Remaster version, I just still don't like it. And it's just not something I really enjoy. And I don't like this like password key system that you have to use in Final Fantasy 2 to kind of like talk to certain people to progress in the story. I just find it to be very tedious, and I you know, as an adult, I don't have the time to really explore these games. Some people have a fondness for this one. I personally just don't. I just don't like it. It's just not one of my favorites, and I do not recommend this to like 90% of people. If you are a completionist and you just want to play through the series like me, like that's the kind of person I am, and Final Fantasy 2 is something I've beaten, and I just, you know, I'm kind of glad I beaten it for like, yeah, I did it, but like it wasn't enjoyable. So I don't even know how to feel about that. But yeah, Final Fantasy 2 is definitely not one of my favorites. Now, Final Fantasy 3 is an interesting one because a lot of people will tout Final Fantasy 3 as being the best one on the NES. For me personally, I'm actually going to have it slightly behind Final Fantasy 1 in the B tier. It's definitely something I recommend for most people, It's even honestly the DS version does a great job reimagining this game, and adding a lot of layers to it that weren't there before. For me personally, I enjoy the simplicity of Final Fantasy 1, and that last dungeon in Final Fantasy 3 really knocks it down a peg for me personally. I love the job system in it, and I really love the boss fights and the battles in it. I think that's a huge improvement. And I do like aspects of the story, but there's something simple and unique about Final Fantasy 1 that is like a little bit more. But Final Fantasy 3 is still an excellent game, and I still recommend, if you are someone that is already a fan of the franchise, and if you want to explore other games, that's an excellent one to try. Now, Final Fantasy IV. This is going to be an A tier. I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy IV because of the storytelling, the way that it was able to innovate on the battle system, and it was able to actually really dial into like having one main character. Now on the Super Nintendo, we were able to have like maybe larger than life stories that we weren't able to tell in the NES, but just based on constraints. Now we may have more text available, we can tell more interesting stories, and I like almost every single character with the exception of one. Character. And I just genuinely enjoy the journey I had with Final Fantasy IV, and I can definitely recommend this as someone's first Final Fantasy game. In fact, a lot of people will, because this is when they actually really took strides with the storytelling in the series, and this is one of Uematsu's best soundtracks. I might have to do a separate tier list video just for the soundtracks alone, because even some of the worst games in the series have some of the best soundtracks in the series. But for me personally, Final Fantasy IV has one of the best soundtracks, it's one of the best games I've ever played, and it's a great introduction to the series. Now, Final Fantasy IV The After Years, I have not played, and I refuse to play it because I feel like Final Fantasy IV ended perfectly, and that's all I have to say about that. Final Fantasy V is something I beat recently, and I played the Game Boy Advance version right before the Pixel Remaster came out. And I have to say, I really enjoy Final Fantasy V. A lot of people will tout Final Fantasy V as their favorite for gameplay alone, and I totally respect that. For me, the thing that's going to hold it back in A tier, and even behind Final Fantasy IV, is actually the storytelling. Now, the storytelling isn't bad. If you look at the artist's intent was to tell a more lighthearted story, and they did that perfectly well. And even some parts are actually not lighthearted at all. It's actually could be a very dark game at times, but for me, I personally just don't like the villain in this at all. And a villain for these Final Fantasy games is really important to me because Final Fantasy has some of the best villains. I'm not a big fan of fighting trees as a big villain, but whatever. But other than that, the characters are amazing though. I have to talk about the good stuff. The characters are absolutely amazing. They just have so much energy and life to them. It's probably one of my favorite casts in the entire franchise. I love the battle system, obviously. If the battle system alone would probably get it up to S tier, but what pulls it back is really the storytelling for me personally, because that's what really a big component of having a good Final Fantasy game is having a really good story. Personally, it's not for me, but I get it if it's for you. But you know, other than that, the characters are great. The music is fantastic. Not the best in the franchise, but it's great. And then also, I really, really love that battle system. Like, enough can't be said about that. So, there's a lot of nuances I can get to, and I can do a retrospective at some point, but this is just a simple tier list, so I gotta move on to the next game. First S tier game. And actually, you know what? I still fight with myself if this is my favorite Final Fantasy. I know it's not. Personally, for me, it's not my favorite, it's my second favorite. We're gonna go into what's my first favorite in a moment, but yeah, Final Fantasy VI is an amazing RPG. It's one of the best stories I've ever heard or I've ever experienced in fiction. And I also love the battle system in this. I actually really like the Magicite system, and I love every single character in this game. I can't say enough words. The story is fantastic. The soundtrack is chilling. The characters are some of the best in the franchise, and I desperately hope that, you know, I know we have the Pixel Remaster, but I desperately hope that we get a 2D, 3D, HD pixel, like kind of Octopath Traveler style of this game, because that would be amazing. Now, Final Fantasy VII is an S tier game. It's just not my number one. It's actually my number 4, maybe 5. We'll go into that in just a bit. So Final Fantasy VII, for me personally, is an S tier game, and it's so big. It's basically, when some people think Final Fantasy VII is the first thing that comes to mind, and for a lot of people, it's their favorite, and I totally understand why. What I like about Final Fantasy VII And what I hate about Final Fantasy VII at the same time is the damn compilation. If you take Final Fantasy VII by itself and you never had any context of the entire compilation, it would actually probably be like still an S tier, but maybe even lower in my list. What helps and hurts this game is that I personally feel like the ending was really good. Not completely satisfactory for me personally, but really good. I actually really like it. But then you have things like Advent Children, which had some amazing things, like this cool anime cutscene. But at the same time, I had the main character going over the same character arc he went through in the original game, kind of, even though we went past that. And then we have, you know, shitty things like a Dirge of Cerberus. I really like Crisis Core. Not everybody does, and I don't like everything they do in that game. I mean, Genesis is one of the worst things to happen to the 7 compilation, but Zack is one of the best things to happen to the 7 compilation. This 7 can get all over the place for me sometimes. Now, if I would actually put, you know, FF7R is not on this list, but I'm going to just combine it with FF7 because I find them to be equal in terms of ranking. Because for me, Final Fantasy 7R, I mean, it's hard for me to judge that because I feel like I need to see the entire series complete before I make a final judgment. But it's by itself, it has one of the best battle systems in the series. 7 has probably the second best cast for me personally because every character had time to shine. It has a very compelling villain, even though I don't feel like he's explored as much in this game as he is in others. And then the world is beautiful. I love what this is probably one of my favorite worlds in Final Fantasy, and there's so many great things with 7. It's just, for me, the reason why I guess it's not my favorite is just because there's a couple things I wish I got more stuff on, and then I kind of regret getting some more information on those things, because when I did get more information about those things, it's not what I expected, and it actually hampered the original experience. So 7 is just kind of a mixed ball for me. But again, I still think 7 is like a legendary game. Like, it's not to say that it's not a great game. There's a top 20 video game of all time list for myself, 7 would be on that top 20. So I hope you guys understand that. Like, I'm not bashing this game. It's just not my favorite, and I hope you guys understand that. Now, Final Fantasy VIII, I'm gonna put above Final Fantasy IV, actually, because I really like Final Fantasy VIII. Now, I don't love everything about this game. I love the music, and I think the storytelling gets better as I personally age, because even though I don't relate to the main character Squall, I know people like that in real life that are just very distant with people because they struggle to form strong connections with others based on past trauma. And I really like that about that character. Even though I personally have not felt that, I totally have seen that, and I feel like they portrayed that very accurately. They're not afraid to have a main character that has a lot of flaws, and I really like that about Final Fantasy VIII. It's not my favorite romance, but it works for this title, and I don't think it's horrible. I do think the romance for other characters is a lot better than the main romance that you see in the cover art, and I'm pretty sure if you guys know that there's other romances in this game that are just a little bit better. It's Final Fantasy VIII storytelling and music and its world are actually quite compelling. What I don't like about Final Fantasy VIII is actually the battle system. I felt like this game was a breeze once you kind of figured it out. It does this thing where it tries to level the enemies up to your level. So if you just purposely skip battles, you can actually have all the enemies at level 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. You can have them at level 5 at the end of the game, and even your bosses at level 5 at the end of the game. But your character can still grow in stats through other means. And I think that's a little broken, and I definitely abuse that. And I think, for me personally, I do like when games challenge me, and I like when that challenge is based on it's not me creating my own challenge. Basically, it's me getting good at the mechanics of the game, and then it slowly, progressively gets harder. I don't like having to build my own challenging this is a personal thing. Some people love that kind of customizability and player choice. For me, though, if I'm playing an RPG or a JRPG, if I'm playing a role-playing game, I want to be immersed in the story, and it's hard for me to be immersed in the story when the final boss is a cakewalk. It's easy for me to be immersed if the final boss is actually hard, even despite leveling up and all this stuff. So for me, I mean, there's definitely a balance. So for me, I don't know, Final Fantasy 8 is an amazing game. It's not something I recommend first, but it is like better than 4 and 5 in my personal opinion. I really like the storytelling, and I love. Actually, I even like the battle system to an extent. It's just that once you learn how to level up, that's what breaks the game. So Final Fantasy 9. We made it, guys. This is my favorite Final Fantasy. I'm not gonna even fucking drag this out. Final Fantasy 9 is my favorite Final Fantasy, and it's so funny because it's actually not the first Final Fantasy I'd recommend people to try. I'd recommend someone's first Final Fantasy either be either 6 or 10, actually, which is kind of interesting. But for me, Final Fantasy 9 is my favorite. It means a lot to me. I love every single character in this game. It's not my favorite cast. There's a couple cast members that I'm just like, why are you here? But like, they have their own comedic value and they have their own things that I enjoy, but they're also kind of just there. It's kind of interesting. But I love like so many things about the Final Fantasy 9. I love the world that they built. I love every single character. One of my favorite things about this game is the main villain. The main villain, I think, is one of the best in the series. I didn't really touch about the main villain in 6 and 7. Those have great villains. For me, 9's villain, just his motivations just make the most sense to me. And what's nice is that we got to feel his presence throughout the game. We got to see his character development, and I think we didn't get to see that in any other Final Fantasy game up to this point, at least as much. For me personally, this is the first Final Fantasy game that really took advantage of giving the main villain a lot more depth, and I really appreciate that. I love the battle system. I actually think it's really, really fun, and it's one of the harder games in the series. There's a couple things, obviously. There's no such thing as a perfect game. And there's, I don't like the card game in Final Fantasy 9. And there's a couple small things that, they're optional, but I don't like them. But, for me personally, Final Fantasy 9 is a masterpiece in JRPGs. And for me personally, it's absolutely my favorite Final Fantasy. Nothing's gonna top this. And I don't see that happening for quite some times, but I will give other games a chance, actually. So yeah, Final Fantasy 9, my absolute favorite, and I'll probably make a retrospective on that one day, but we need time for that, and I don't have that much time right now. So moving on. So another interesting one I want to point out is Final Fantasy X. This is going to be the first Final Fantasy where things start to get a little divisive. Because after Final Fantasy IX, the main series creator, Hironobu Sakaguchi, had left Square Enix. A little bit after 10, he produced 10, but he didn't really closely work on 10. And then shortly after 10 was released, he left the company. And ever since then, I feel like Final Fantasy has gone all over the place. That's not to say that the series is going downhill after he left. In fact, you'll notice that Final Fantasy X is going to be in my S tier. And I'm actually going to put it right behind Final Fantasy VI. But I will say, there are days where I will put Final Fantasy X over Final Fantasy VI. Because there are a few cutscenes in this game that just make me cry like no other game before. Like, this has one of the best endings in any Final Fantasy. I think personally, it has the best ending in like all Final Fantasy. It gets me to tears every single time. I try not to watch it, but it's one of those things that I love this game. The battle system's amazing. The world is so interesting. The lore behind the world and how everything works, just phenomenal. The only thing that's holding it back from being like number 2 or number 1 is that personally, this is the first Final Fantasy where they start to go really linear, right? You don't get to really explore the worlds like any other Final Fantasy game before it. In every other Final Fantasy game, you get to actually free roam the world, and I feel like that added a lot to the immersion of your character in the world. And in Final Fantasy X, that's just not the case. It's one place to the next. However, it's not really something like Final Fantasy IX and before, where you can kind of like go wherever you want, whenever you want, or for the most part, like to most places whenever you want. You're kind of like just stuck on the path that 10 leaves on for you, and there's a point where you can kind of explore, but you're kind of just choosing places within a map. This game also has probably my second favorite soundtrack in the series as well. So for me, Final Fantasy X is like an amazing Final Fantasy. It's my third favorite personally. 7 comes right after it, and then it barely beats 7, but it does beat 7 for me personally because of just how well this was put together. If I was to recommend one Final Fantasy for you to jump into, it would probably be 10. So the first 10 Final Fantasy games I will say are truly special in that sense, is that they all have a consistent feel. Final Fantasy X-2 is a game I haven't played. And I'm not going to even pretend that I have played it. I'm not going to even pretend I like it or don't like it. Some people love the battle system in this game, and that's fine. With how 10 ended, I just don't want to play 10-2. But it is something I have to force myself to do at some time. So I will do it at some point. It's not something I'm completely avoiding, but it is something that I will acknowledge I just have not played. So I don't think I will play it for quite some time. There's another Final Fantasy actually coming up that I have to play first. That being said, let's move on to next Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy 11. I've not played this one as well, mainly because I'm just not an MMO person, so I'm just going to be real with you. I don't have much to say on it. I like a couple songs from it, like Gustaberg and Ron Fair, and I really understood the song. Well, I don't want to say understood, but I found out about the songs because of Theatrhythm Final Fantasy. And yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about that. Final Fantasy 12, though, is a game that I'm playing next, but I still have not played. It's the next game I'm planning to play right after, and I guess that's going to go for Final Fantasy 12 for the DS as well. I have not played that one. I heard a lot of great things about it, and for some people it's one of their favorite Final Fantasies, so hopefully I have a good time with it. It's a game I'm planning to play right after I beat Super Mario RPG. That's the game I'm currently playing. People are going to hate me for this, because this is a very divisive game, but I'm going to put Final Fantasy 13 on a D tier. I'm going to be honest with you, I just don't like the characters in this game personally. There's only one character I like, and then he gets kind of shafted halfway through the game. And there's two characters that I'm like, okay, they're cool. And then every other character I just don't like. I don't like them. I don't think they're good people. And I don't think the villain is that great at all. I thought the battle system was fine, but because of how linear they made this game, like 10 they made linear, but you still got different paths to explore. This is literally like a hallway that you just play through the entire game. There's one section where it opens up a little bit, so now I can choose the direction where I can just run and fight, which that's all this game is. It's running, fighting, running, fighting, running, fighting. No exploration, no good side quests, just running and fighting. And I feel like that is so boring. And it's one reason why I don't like this game. I feel like this game is just incredibly boring to play. I don't like the characters. The music is amazing. I'm not going to refute that. The music in Final Fantasy 13 is amazing. Like, again, every single game on this list. Every single game on this list has a great soundtrack. But Final Fantasy 13 is just not a game I enjoy. And I don't even really like the story. The only thing I could say is that the concept of the world is interesting. I like the premise. I don't like how they talked. I guess the story is not bad. It's just how they told the story is what I don't like. So that's just my problem with Final Fantasy 13. I just personally don't like it. I know it's some people's favorite. I just don't like it. I actually like it less than Final Fantasy 2. I'd rather play Final Fantasy 2 than 13, for me personally. Final Fantasy 13-2, I have played, and I'm going to give it a C tier, because I actually like the story in that one a little bit more. The music I actually like a little bit more. I still don't think it's great, don't get me wrong. I just like it a little bit more. I hesitate to put it in D, because I actually do think it's quite fun to play. I don't remember much of it though, to be honest with you. I think it's a little bit forgettable in that sense. Next game I'm going to talk about really quick. Lightning Returns. I haven't played that. I don't really feel the need or want to, even though Final Fantasy 13-2 left on a cliffhanger. I still feel like I didn't want to play through Final Fantasy 13 Lightning Returns. Just not for me. Now this is going to be the most divisive one. I have not played Final Fantasy 14. I mentioned before, and I'm going to put all the expansions here. I mentioned before that I'm not an MMO guy, and I understand that there are some Final Fantasy 14 fans that are going to probably kill me for this. I don't know if I can be a fan of this game. The reason why I love Final Fantasy games in particular is because I play them, and I play through a story, I get to judge the story and the characters and the gameplay, and then I'm done. Even if the game is 60, 70 hours, I know that there's end in sight. The problem I have with playing 14 for me personally is that there's no end in sight, and I can't. There are people that I know that have spent thousands of hours on this game, and I just cannot justify that at this point in my life. That's a lot of time. And I'm not saying that, don't spend time enjoying things or anything like that, but like, I want to enjoy a bunch of different things, not like one thing. It's like the same thing with One Piece. It's going to be really hard for me to get into One Piece because they're on episode like 1000 something. And I haven't even started episode 1, and there's so many other things I want to explore as well, and I don't know if I want to dedicate that much time to this. That's just me personally, dude. I don't know if I'm ever going to get into Final Fantasy 14 because of that. I need to know that there's an end in sight. I need them to release an expansion that finishes off the entire game, and then maybe I will just rush through the story. One other thing that a lot of people will tell me is that, after 30 hours or 40 hours of the game, it gets good. And I just can't fathom spending 30 hours to a point where I get to Heavensward and it's finally good. I just can't do it. Something about it, man. I just don't know if I have it in me to get through Final Fantasy 14. It's just a lot of commitment that I don't know if I have right now. We're going to get to the 2 most controversial ones on this list. And it's probably going to be the one that's going to stir up the most controversy. So Final Fantasy 15. And when I say Final Fantasy 15, I'm gonna make it the Royal Edition, so no one gets on my ass about this. Final Fantasy 15 Royal Edition, and I'm gonna even say fuck it, I'll include the movie and the anime. Just put it all together in one little fucking package. Final Fantasy 15 The Universe, because you need to watch the movie and watch the anime and the game and the DLC to fully understand it. But those 4 things. I'm not going to include the book and the mobile games. Just those 4 things. I'm going to put those together as one package. Just because that's how I assume how this game was originally going to be made. I'm going to put this game... Man, I'm going to get so much shit for this. I'm going to put this game in A tier. It's not S tier. I'm going to tell you why it's A tier. And I'm going to tell you why I like it more than Final Fantasy VIII. And why people are going to fucking hate me for this. This is gonna sound crazy to you guys, but I think it has one of my favorite soundtracks in the entire franchise. And I know music alone is not enough to make a game good, but Yoko Shimomura is my favorite video game composer, and I love her music in this. I think there's still songs in like any Final Fantasy game that hasn't even topped Apocalyptic Noctis. It has not touched Magna Insomnia, which is one of my favorite final boss songs of all time. Maybe my favorite. The villain is actually, I think, my favorite in the series. I think the cast is actually probably my favorite in the series because I love the way they get along. Well, I'm not going to say my favorite, but they're like my second favorite because I do think the 7 and 7 cast is probably a little bit better because I got to feel more depth with them. But 15 cast, like those 4 main characters, bro, I love them. Like, I don't care what anybody says. People could say all the stereotypical things they want, but I fell in love with them. Even without the DLC. When I initially played this game, I played it, raw dog, no updates, just like release day. I played it and I still had a good time. What fucking puts it in A tier when it should have been S tier is all the wasted potential it had. Because even when you include the DLC and the movie and even the fucking anime, there's still so much of this experience that still feels incomplete. And had they just settled in and just maybe even took an extra year to finish this all up and just... I already waited 10 years. I can wait 1 more year for you to really fucking finish this up. Or even 6 months. I don't care. Really finish this up, polish it, and release it. What they ended up doing was something I don't think I've ever seen any other RPG company do for their a main flagship game, is that they release the game and then they're like, alright guys, what do you think? What do you want to see more of? And then I feel like then they took those concepts and expanded upon them, which is so strange. Imagine if they had released Final Fantasy VII back in the day and they released Disc 1 and then they were like, alright guys, now with this here, what characters do you want to see more development for? That's really weird. And I like the development I got with these characters. Ignis, I did not like at first. I ended up loving towards the end of the game, right? It's one of those things that this game was such an anomaly. And even with all of that mess, I still love the characters, the villain, the music, the world, I still love this game, and I even like the story. I even genuinely like the story, and I think it has one of the best endings. But what's gonna hold it back in A tier, and the reason why I refuse to put this in S tier, it's something I could recommend to someone. It's not something that I'm gonna say is the shining example of the series, simply because of how weirdly unfinished this is. And how I just, it's like the potential is there. And if you put all the missing pieces in your mind, maybe it could be one of the best pieces of fiction you can ever experience. But for me, man, I wanted it. Like I wanted it to be amazing, guys. I love Kingdom Hearts. I have the fucking Keyblade tattooed on my arm. So, you know, the more designing these characters and thinking about the world and all this shit, like I obviously wanted this to be the best Final Fantasy. I was rooting for this.
I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. How dare you?
I was rooting for 15, and it was like, man, you're not bad at all. You're a great game, but you let me down. Like, I wanted you to be the best. I wanted you to be the best. I still really like Final Fantasy 15 more than a lot of other people that love the franchise. A lot of people are gonna hate me just for putting it this high on the list because they think this game freaking sucks. There's no depth to it. This freaking incomplete. I hate it. Like, at least 13 was incomplete, but personally I would play, you know, like 15, which is an incomplete masterpiece, than 13, which is a complete fucking mess. If you like 13, I'm honestly sharing my opinions very like in a very like passionate way. But if you like 13, no shade to you. I get it. I have friends, like really good friends, that love 13, and that's just not me. I just don't like it. It's just not my form of storytelling, even though I love the music and other aspects. But 15, I really enjoy 15, and I wish I could say I love it. I wish I could say it's my favorite Final Fantasy game. That's just not the case, unfortunately. But it's okay. 15 is still an amazing game, so I would still give it a shot if you are interested in the series. Let's move on to the final Final Fantasy that we've had on this list. Now, Final Fantasy 16. Here are my final thoughts on the game after playing it and playing through this DLC and everything. So, if you saw my initial video on Final Fantasy 16, you know that I went to this game as blind as possible with no expectations. I really went into this game maybe watching the first reveal trailer because it was just shown to me, I think at a PlayStation conference. I didn't know it was a Final Fantasy trailer until the very end. And then after that, I saw nothing else. No promotional trailers. I did not follow the Twitter account. All I knew is that this is the main character. He's gonna grow up. There's summons in it. I don't even know they were called icons yet, but there's summons in it. And it's rated M. That's all I knew, guys. Like, I really went into this as blind as possible because I wanted to go into it with the least amount of expectations. And now you might be expecting me to say that I'm going to put it in D tier. That's not the case. But I'm going to put it in C tier, guys. Maybe I'm going to put it in B tier for the gameplay. Let me get into that really quick. Final Fantasy 16 is not a game that I would immediately recommend to a lot of people. If you just like gameplay, maybe. But for story, the first 2 hours of this game are incredible. Like the first, I would say first 1/3 of this game, up to a certain boss fight. After that boss fight, you know, there's this point where the game does this, and it's like, oh, this is really good stuff, and it's incredible, and the mystery is there, and then it gets to this one boss fight. And then it kind of dips, but this is what I've seen from the community. It dips here, and then from here, it goes back up, and people freaking love this game like it's their favorite Final Fantasy, or it dips down here, and it's like one of the worst fucking Final Fantasies you can play. Like, it does go down. It's not the worst in the series, absolutely. Like, I just think after a certain boss fight, the dialogue is like repeated, and I feel like I'm hearing the same conversation between the hero and the villain. I think the villain is interesting. I don't think he's as, you know, menacing as the other villains in this list. There are main characters, you know, besides the main two characters, which I'm not going to spoil, but the main two characters are very interesting, and everyone else has potential to be, and it's just not met. And you can't give it like the 15 thing where it's like, man, like I had this like preconceived notion. Like I literally had no expectation among this character. The only expectation I had was what the game was giving me at the time of playing it. And there's certain characters that just don't meet their potential, and they just something happens to them. Like they have this one moment and then they're just fucking done, which is not the case with any other like game on this list, which is strange. It's just that the ending part left a really sour taste in my mouth, because I did not find it to be satisfactory at all. There were things that I thought were gonna happen that, you know, freaking made me cry. I did cry in this game several times, and then I was really frustrated at this game at other points. Man, it's just the storytelling towards the second half where I felt like, okay, I'm hearing the same fucking conversation for like 10 more hours. Like this is horrendous. Like there's some extra lore stuff, and like that's about it. Battling is fun, but it was not challenging at all. I think I died like twice in the beginning, and that's about it. I don't know what to say about this game, honestly, other than like I really gave it the benefit of the doubt, guys. Like I'm gonna say like it's not like C or D tier. It's not bad. It's not a bad game, but it's just the way that it started. I genuinely thought this was gonna be like an S tier game. And then the way that it ended, I'm like, dang, you really went down. Like, you went down 2 pegs. And I've heard rumors that this was initially supposed to be a 2-disc game, which makes sense because maybe that would explain why the second half is the way that it is. But that doesn't excuse the final product that I got. And it's not like I was anticipating this game, to be honest with you guys. Like, it was just like the week before it came out, I got a little excited and I got it. And I got a PS5 just to fucking play this game. So I didn't have any expectations, but that's why I was excited for it. I was like, if this is bad, well, then cool. Like, I actually went into it as blind as possible, and I got to say it was bad. But if it's great, then I could say like this is gonna be a completely interesting experience for me because I didn't look up anything about this game. Like, and I think that's just kind of disappointing because it started off so strong. Like, it has like maybe one of the best not the best. I think Final Fantasy 7 and 7 Remake have the best introduction in the series. But that's life, right? You can't like everything. But yeah, that's my official Final Fantasy tier list. And I might make a retrospective about my favorites in the series. I don't think I want to do a retrospective of like 1 through 16. That would just, there's plenty of people that are doing that. It seems like it'd be fun, but I think it'd also be tiring for me at this point in my life. But this is how I feel about the Final Fantasy series, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Share your list and also your opinions as well. Please be respectful. If you love 13, that's fine. Like I would like to have a conversation with you about it. I'm not saying it's all like the worst thing I've ever experienced. There's good qualities to it, and we can agree to disagree. I think the ones that are gonna be super divisive, honestly, are 15, 16. Some people are they put 16 in their S tier, and that's just not me. But it's not my D tier either, so like it's very middle of the road. But some people are gonna honestly really love or hate that I have it right in the middle. We'll see. But let's be respectful. Let's have a conversation. I would love to engage with you about this list. Tell me your thoughts. I'd love to hear it. Anyways, guys, until the next video, take care.